Welcome back to another episode of Virtual DDD, where we talk about the facilitating software architecture and design. And I'm here today with Kenny and Andrea. And Kenny's going to share a story with us this time of facilitating software architecture. So Kenny is one of the co-authors of the book called Collaborative Software Design, along with Heen and Evelyn. And Kenny's had a lot of experience as a consultant with all of these things. So Kenny was going to share one of his experiences with us, and we were going to see what we can learn from it. So over to you, Kenny.
Yes, thank you. So one thing, what I like about all this is that we really want to take very deep democratic, decentralized decision. That's in your book and my book, and Andrea talks a lot about that. But the road towards that is not as easy as possible because there's a lot of authority in most of the companies that people are starting with, right? So my story was a few years back, I was in a company and they were growing. They had an investment and I was there as an architect and I tried to facilitate the architecture with the team. But the team was also a meteor junior skilled. So on one hand, you want to, this is always the case what I usually see, right? Architects are usually being promoted because they're the person that knows the most, so they get promoted, and I don't feel like that's a good thing, but anyway, that's happening. So what if you're in that position that I was in, and then all of a sudden the board comes to you and say, well, we need to grow from 8 to 150 in a few years, right? That was a challenge. So back then they were writing only on vanilla JavaScript. So the appointment was, okay, we need to find a front-end framework or language that can grow with the company, right? Vanilla JS is not that case. So we looked in the market and the market says it was either Vue or React. So decide, Kenny. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to decide it because I'm not developing actively in JavaScript here. I went to the group, but the group was a group of 4 or 5 developers. And you discuss this with them and say, well, this is the case. We need to grow. And this is already a sort of autocratic in a way, right? Where you go in. So not all decisions have to be full advised or have to be full democratic. I try to be democratic as possible. But then you're getting into this uncomfortableness like, okay, we need to decide this. And in that case, there's a lot happening, right? Some people don't have any experience in React or Vue. Someone has experience in Vue. The rest has experience in React. So how do you deal with this fact? What I did was give that conversation to the group and try to talk with them. Like, okay, what do we want? Where do we want to go? So I set up an ADR, write down, okay, it's either Vue or React. What are the pros and cons? But nobody had experience about these pros and cons. And we couldn't hire any consult. There was one consultative, and this was a React expert. It was a consultant, and the person working there was more of a Vue developer. So this is sort of like a conflictious thing because you don't want to go with what the consultant says because the consultants will move. And there's all these sorts of things that you need to take in consideration. So what I gave them as an assignment is like, okay, here's a new feature for the front end. The consultant with a few of the people, they both write one in Vue and one in React and just see, okay, what are the differences? But once I remember there were 2 that didn't really care which way they were going. So it got all into one meteor's hands, and that meteor needed to decide. And that felt very uncomfortable for the meteor. And eventually it says, yeah, I felt very uncomfortable making this decision now and write it down in the ADR that I took the decision, because if it's going to grow and people come in and I say it's Vue and they're like, what a stupid decision that you made. So eventually what I did, but I'm very curious what you would do, but what I did eventually is at that point, they got into what we call in the book shadows. Like, yeah, I feel uncomfortable, uncertain, I'm a meteor, I'm not yet grown enough to make this decision. So I told them, okay, then I'll take the decision. So ask for consent. Do you want me to take the decision? And I'm fine with taking the decision based on what you were saying. Eventually we choose for React, or I choose for React, of course, because I thought, okay, I'm taking this away from this person. And what I did then, of course, is what do you need to go along with this? Well, that person needed training. So we arranged for all the developers to get some React training in this case. But yeah, that uncomfortableness, if you come in and there's all these different politics at play, and you want the team to take. This is what a lot of technical people want to get into technicality. They say, well, I want people to take democratic decisions or decisions with the group, but then they stay silent, they feel uncomfortable. So I'm very curious. In my way, I try to get into that uncomfortable, make it safe for them to speak up and then ask for the consent so that I can take the decision. But I'm very curious about your thoughts, right? So I'm not against autocratic decisions as long as you try to get consent, connect with the group. And I think that's especially for new architects, right? That usually don't have mandates in a company because they're not building stuff. How are you going to navigate that web of, I think that's one of the real challenges I still face to this day, right? That I faced recently again, right? Thinking, well, a decision is theoretically okay to go A, but the people want to go B. I'm curious how you are dealing with that fact.
I guess from heuristics. So if I was, there's obviously a few options, and I'm pretty sure that we've gone through a few of the options ourselves, right? So if you're going through this, enabling to at least make room to hear all the options, so that's one way. It's like what you said, you're like, okay, I actually want to hear your opinions. So if you're doing that, one of the hard balances is that some people don't want to talk because they don't want to talk. As not because there's any inherent problem or because they lack experience, but because honestly, they don't want to get involved. And it's been a hard lesson for me to learn that then that's okay. And so I am curious to hear about that aspect too, of like sometimes pushing people to say what they think means that they are really trying to get away from actually thinking about it. They're like, you know what, this, and I think this, do you want me to take the decision is something that I wish I learned earlier. So that's one option. The other option, I guess, is also just kind of say, why push it back? Go like, well, we need to make this decision, but you're saying that we shouldn't hire contractors. That's anti-ethical. Can we get some consultants to help the team learn both, like learn enough so they can make a better informed decision? Because in reality, that's if you're trying to build for the future, then can we invest on it?
That's the whole enablement team from team topology teams to make better decisions.
Another area which I push back. And a third option that is also possible is like, can we actually pause temporarily and spend time learning? So so we split how many people there are and try to choose the people that are, if someone is kind of for Vue and kind of for React, put them in the other team.
Yeah, that's what I hear, right? Can
so
build
that
both sides.
Yeah, and like let them build, but it's not like a little experiment. It's like, no, actually, maybe let's say a couple of weeks that if there's a team of 4 people, you're like, listen, this is 4 people. They actually need time. You don't just learn stuff. We're not in the matrix. Maybe this is a very old reference for some people, but where you can just plug in. Hopefully not. So that would be the 3 options that when in that situation I've been in. It's not easy.
I forgot the second one. What you said was very important. I stood into the team and I said, today we're not going to leave until we made a decision. I think that was a good one.
I think the hard thing is building. So things I realized while I was kind of doing this and experimenting with this more and more was that while it gives everyone the opportunity to decide, not everyone wants to decide. Just to Andrea's point, right? Some people just don't want. They're like, it's fine. I'm not at that place in my career where I don't feel that this is something that I have anything to contribute to. And I'm happy to go with whatever everyone else decides. So forcing people to decide when they don't want to, that's hard. But then the kind of flip side is, and I wrote about this in my books, one of the things that frustrated me, which is why I kind of ended up writing the book, but like, very good at coming up with all the opinions, all the pros and cons. We can have very strong opinions, and we can also, when properly facilitated, we can remove the emotion. We're pretty good at getting down, technologists, pretty good usually at getting down to like the concrete facts. But because of accountability, because we know the power that software can have, we live in code bases where someone made an accidental decision 3 years or 7 years before, and now it's causing thousands of pounds of pain per day. So people are terrified to actually take the decision, say, I vote for this or vote for that. And so like what you said, Kenny, is definitely a thing that I've done where or even with people's opinions, sometimes they have an opinion, but they're not confident being the name against it. So I've offered to say, look, this is a relevant piece of information. I can add it to the ADR, or I can add it as advice, as a comment or something. And I won't acknowledge you, but then we've put this piece of information into the mix because I think it's super important. And like, I think more generally, I've used ADRs to call, like, you can bring stuff to the surface because you can say, right, there's just this thing that nobody's thinking about or talking about. Let's write it down. Let's bring all of the stuff into the open. And then I think the context becomes most powerful, right? It's like, why is this decision happening now? What is important about it? And I think the last point, like you said, the people and the skills and the time you have available and all of those things are important context. And this is one of the examples in the book that we've got, and it's actually with Pete Hunter, who's at OpenGI, who hopefully we can get on and speak to. One team wanted to pick an entirely new framework because they were like, we know it's suitable, but also we'd love to just, like, for our benefit, it would be cool for us to learn a new technology. It feels like a good fit. We think we've done the right homework, and it will be suitable for this. We know we don't have any skills, but we also think that would be a plus point. I was like, it's like a disaster. But it turned out to be perfect. Bringing all of these things in and making people feel safe. And like you said, Kenny, you can proxy for those people to protect that safety until they realize that there isn't going to be negative consequences, because there is always that shadow stuff and the kind of surrounding patriarchal kind of hierarchy. You did what? It's your fault. Therefore, this disaster comes down on you. People are still worried to do that. So
yeah, it's also a bit, and the reverse is also true, right? As an architect from a start, and that's what you want to, of course, enable towards the teams, is that the teams get more understanding of the system-wide context. That's also a discussion that's usually there. So teams might also make, I think you went into that, teams might also make decisions. We're going to put it in our own service. So let's say we're going to put it in our own monolith, even though it's really a different system, but we're going to model it in our system because our team has this ecosystem of libraries in that system, and making it separate takes too much too much work. And then, well, you as an architect are like, but it's a different surface, right? You should. And I remember that conversation happened, and then we advised against it. And then there's this whole, okay, what are we going to do now? Because we know for sure that it makes your life easier as developers, we understand, but it's the feature. So what I usually see in media overconfidence bias comes in, and they say, well, what's the problem with making this decision? But they haven't lived the experience of long-term architecting systems, right?
Yeah.
There's a whole conflictuous or tension there as well.
Yeah.
Teach these people to understand something that they need to go through first. But if you make that decision, it's going to be a ramification decision, because we only do this for significant design decisions, right?
Yeah, I heard there's a quote, I worked with someone who apparently walked up to Eric Evans, so this might not be true. Eric probably knows if it is or isn't. And they said, what is the thing that makes people want to do DDD? And the answer was they need to felt the pain, because otherwise it's just a collection of patterns, right? And that is systems architecture, right? It's like, it's very easy to make, kind of the job is to see the whole system, to see the longer term horizon and all of those kind of things, right? Whereas the people who are making the point decisions, which is what you want, right? Loads of small incremental decisions, aren't supposed to have that. They're supposed to be more local, more immediate, more, smaller time horizon stuff. But you do need, like Trond Hjortland would talk about, like the STS, social technical systems. Oh, Kenny's left the room. Like, you want the whole system view as well, right, Andrea? So, but getting that is hard.
Yes, I'm sure that Kenny's departure was accidental, so he might join us again. And I think I'll bring this again when he joins again. But I think we're implicitly talking a lot about governance, and I think that deserves attention. And like all decisions kind of have this governance. And I think when people start thinking of decentralized architecture or the advice process or anything like that, people immediately start thinking, but who's responsible? I think even making explicit who's going to have governance is probably something that needs to be discussed, because compliance is something that is kind of orthogonal to that as well.
Yep.
Again, this is the normal world that we live in, right? I like it that we're talking about it implicitly, but we should mention it also explicitly.
Yeah, it's the thing I get asked. Something I get asked all the time when I go to clients is like, yeah, but what's the governance framework? And I think governance brings with it a lot of stuff, maybe baggage from a technical perspective, which is bad. It's like how the old hierarchy used to impose itself. But I think like maybe in today's political world, right, checks and balances and kind of things feel like a good thing, right? Maybe because otherwise one thing can go off in a really bad direction just for the benefit of a few without, bringing in thinking about the benefits for everyone. That's interesting actually as well. I did a bit of research for this. So like things like the TOGAF framework and the Open Agile architecture frameworks, they acknowledge the fact that agile development practices have changed things, and they're like, we don't mind. Pretty much, it says in the Open Agile architecture framework, it's like decisions can be anywhere as long as the accountability for the decision sits next door to the responsibility. So the person deciding is also accountable. And if you, as the facilitator, like Kenny is, or you or Andrew, reminding people, it's like, if you make this, you are accountable. And then that can lead to the conversations as Kenny's had, right? Some people are like, I don't feel ready to be accountable. Like, okay, I will help proxy you and I will make sure that it's a sound decision based on what we know at the time and based on all of these help balance the criteria. Because one thing, like we said, as an architect, one thing is you just get better at doing this more and more because your gut feel, not your intellect. I think like your gut feel is to like, this feels good or this feels bad. We've had more because we've just seen more of these things.
I think this is where I like the residuality ideas from Barry Riley. But Kenny, while you were gone, we made explicit the fact that we're speaking of governance and also the relationship between it and also compliance.
Mm-hmm.
And so then just catching you up. Do you have any thoughts on that? On like how?
Well, I think the relevant point there, what Andrew said, and I think it's a guilty pleasure. I'm okay with people taking decisions for me. We usually we're like on the negative side, like, okay, but they took a decision and I don't like it. But sometimes, right, I always say, if someone takes me on a holiday and they decide everything and I'm okay with it, it's a guilty pleasure. I'm fine if people decide for me. And that should be spoken about as well, that it's fine. Like, I don't need to take the decision. We can go anywhere as long as, and that was in the previous episodes, as long as we connect with people's what they want, right? Well, I've heard this is your thoughts, but we went this way. Second thing is, as long as they can rent and they can express their emotion freely, it can also be the opposite. You make a decision for them and they're not okay with that, and that's fine. But let them rent without going in defensive mode. And then at the end you say, yeah, I know, right? You try to really empathize with their situation. And then you ask them, what do you actually need to go along with this? Because we're going to do this, but I want you in and I want to know what will make your life easier going along with this decision.
What do you need to be along to go along? Like people throw around the phrase disagree and commit, but they rarely go, what do you need to commit? They're just like, no, I'm the most senior person and it is going to be limiting to your career to say, I don't agree.
Yeah. And that's the uncomfortableness. Oh yeah. Like 8 out of, I had that one, 7 out of 9, we're going to go for this. And 2 are like, okay. And then when you ask the question, what do you need to go along? They say, well, in this case, it was a decision about trunk-based or not. And they're like, well, we're front-end developers and we don't know how to do
always front.
And okay, so that's what you need. You need to first understand how feature flagging works in the front end. Yeah, okay. Let's add that to the decision, right? We're going to do trunk-based, but first we're going to investigate how this works on the front-end side. And then next week, they were battling the PO for going along with that decision.
And frequently, like you said, the different context is the thing that makes it rare always, right? But frequently it's just they're in a different place. They're looking at things from a different perspective or a different starting location. It's a super, like if you're like, what do you not, why can't you commit? You're like, oh, your context is totally different.
And that's what Heen talks about with her pro-con fix list, right? If you have a con, how can we actually fix that we're not dealing with the problem or neutralize the problem?
Yep. So yeah. Thanks for everybody for joining. Thanks, Andrew and Kenny, for chatting with me and sharing all of that really interesting stuff. And I'm looking forward to having another chat about interesting decisions and facilitating software architecture and design.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you next time.